Hi INFPs, in today's video I'm going to challenge a lot of your assumptions that you might have read online about the INFP and the INFP cognitive functions. What I'm first going to show you is that the traditional view of the brain is outdated and that there is a more modern and more accurate way of looking at your own mind and how you think and make decisions. A lot of people imagine people use 8 cognitive functions and that we use these 8 functions in a specific order and to a specific degree and extent, right? And particularly we have 4 functions that we use and 4 functions that are unconscious and that we don't really know a lot about, and honestly we're quite confused about them, right? But what I want to show you in today's video is that actually you use all 8 functions and it's a lot more straightforward and a lot more simple than what you think. And in this video let's find out how you as an INFP can develop all 8 cognitive functions. A lot of people imagine a brain sliced into 8 different halves. Imagine one function in each particular part of the brain. So here's your extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing. Here's your extroverted feeling and extroverted thinking, right? And here is your introverted feeling and introverted thinking. And maybe here is your introverted intuition and introverted sensing, right? And some of this is based on inaccurate understandings of traditional, brain theory, because we used to work with physiognomy and the general idea that the brain could be divided into different parts, and that if we cut off this part, we would lose the capacity to do these and these tasks and these things, right? But that's not how we look at this in modern neuroscience. In modern neuroscience, we believe the world, and the brain rather, not the world, but the brain works through networks, right? Or perhaps the world works through networks too. Tangent. The truth is, a lot of the functions and processes that INFP uses is spaced out in multiple parts of the brain, and for example, introverted feeling might not just be located here, but might rather be a network of processes that exist all over the world and that communicate to each other through these neurons and synapses in order to, help send information and help you make decisions and help you process on things, right? So how does this change how we look at the cognitive functions? Well, first of all, we tend to believe that INFPs use a certain set of functions in a certain order. Many people try to get INFPs to memorize a specific order of functions. They say, first of all, INFPs use introverted feeling, which makes them introspective and interpersonal. And then secondly, they use extroverted intuition, which makes them explore and take in new information and learn new ideas. And third, after that, they learn to systematize and organize these ideas and experiences and manage with sensory data. And finally, they use extroverted thinking to make decisions, and this is how it works. So we go from this process. We always go through this process, right? But first of all, most hierarchical models of how we make decisions and how we think have been proven to be false oversimplifications. The truth is, most likely, any function can communicate with any function, and any process can interact with any process, and in the individual, the functions don't have to fall in a specific order. There is not a single cognitive function test out there that has been able to prove the function hierarchy is correct, and we only use these 4 functions and in this specific extent, right? So we can talk about subtypes that have learned to use functions differently and to specialize in different directions, and we can talk about individual brain development, because this is the fascinating part. You as an INFP can develop and learn to use any cognitive function. Here, we're going to have to think about what your education background is, what skills you've developed over your life, what work you tend to do, and what kind of tasks you tend to do at your work, right? So what is it you have learned and developed a strong proficiency in doing, right? And how does it compare to other INFPs? Well, what you're going to notice is here, your cognitive functions exist on a spectrum, and you're going to meet INFPs that have developed a certain set of skills and INFPs that have developed other skills, right? Some INFPs are great at math, some are great at art, some INFPs are great at language, some INFPs have learned to become really good at organization and structure, right? So you're going to see that INFPs can specialize in different directions. And this is fascinating because it means that you as an INFP has the choice to choose to develop and become who you want to be, right? Now, there are some general rules, though, that you can follow to not get just completely boggled down in the chaos of cognition, right? And so what I want to show you is that, well, first of all, there's the general view that you shouldn't use and study the general personality traits, right? You should only study the cognitive functions. So a lot of people say, don't use these traits, don't talk about the dichotomies, don't talk about introversion, don't talk about extroversion, talk about extroverted intuition, talk about introverted feeling, right? And focus on the functions only, right? Well, first of all, Carl Jung used both, and you should use both too. And you should recognize that these two are connected to one another, right? Which means as well that you as an INFP, by being more introverted, will show a higher use of all introverted functions. All introverted functions are correlated with each other on the level that they're all introverted. And all extroverted functions are correlated with being extroverted. So the more extroverted you learn to be as an INFP, the more you're going to develop all extroverted functions. The more intuitive you become as an INFP, the more you're going to develop both introverted intuition and extroverted intuition, right? So when you're in an intuitive phase where you're dealing with your imagination and creativity and new information and possibilities, you're exercising properly both of these functions to some extent. Perhaps one more than the other, but you're using both of these functions, right? So in this sense, what you're going to find is that there's a way to develop each and every specific cognitive function. So you can develop introverted feeling quite simply as an INFP by simply learning to journal, reflect on your emotions, reflect on your decision making, what you value, what you don't value, what you like, what you don't like, and to learn to have a more nuanced understanding of yourself and your feelings and values. Because is it just anger? What kind of anger is it? And in what situations and why and how? And what causes it? And how can I manage better? And how can I handle and process my own emotions differently in the future, right? So it's complicated, and it leads to an increased boost in emotional intelligence overall. And it leads to a more healthy relationship to the self, because if you don't reflect on yourself, it's very easy to judge yourself and to be angry with yourself, to feel you're stupid or there's something wrong with you, right? But if you listen to yourself, you'll learn that, hey, actually I have a rational basis for what I do, and it makes sense that I acted the way I did because I felt that, and I hadn't done this, and this has happened to me, and that was tough on me, right? And so this is why we need to develop introverted feeling, and this is why every single type needs to learn to use this function, right? Now, when you develop introverted feeling, you're also going to properly show a stronger development of all introverted functions, because just by learning to journal more, just by learning to understand yourself more, you're also most likely going to end up being a little bit more logical, you're also going to end up being a bit more existentially aware, and you're probably also going to develop a stronger and healthier relationship to society and to your past and who you are and who you've been and what your duty and responsibilities are in life, right? So any form of development leads to development in multiple areas, and it's hard to completely untangle any function and say it's just this part of the brain and you can only use this part of the brain, because that's never going to happen, right? It's going to cause effects and chain reactions all over your mind. And that's why, you know, by learning about philosophy, we can experience a kind of intellectual revolution, which leads to us becoming more connected to nature and the sensory world, for example, or because everything is interconnected, right? And so imagine how you look at, for example, extroverted intuition. A lot of people see extroverted intuition as, you know, the second function of the INFP. And first of all, what do we mean with the second? And second to what? And how? And when? And why? You know, like there's so many questions here that come up. What I like to say is that extroverted intuition can be boosted by learning language, by learning to conceptualize your thoughts through words, by learning to communicate your imagination and your ideas, without specifically pointing at physical objects around you or waving, but through the use of abstract concepts and words that supposedly could represent physical things or ideas. But in that sense, the more you learn language, the more languages you learn, and the more you improve your vocabulary in any specific language, the greater your capacity to communicate ideas and to express and verbalize feelings and ideas and thoughts and all those things, right? So by developing extroverted intuition, while developing language use, you're developing extroverted intuition, and you're also learning to become better at extroverted feeling through it, and also you're becoming better at navigating your physical environment through it, right? Because you can go to a restaurant and you can say, I want this food, and they can make it for you, right? So all these things, like, they're constantly interconnected. Now imagine you want to develop introverted sensing, right? Well, how do you develop that? Well, one way to do it is by memorizing maps, by remembering or visualizing something, by learning how to draw something in high detail, by remembering to recall an object in high accuracy, by being able to flip and rotate objects in your mind. And so you can use introspection, you can use drawing, you can use writing, you can use Excel sheets, you can use all these kinds of maps and charts in order to help boost this intelligence. And why do you want to do it? Well, you want to, for example, get better at memorizing conversations, what people used to say to you. And you want to get better at getting perspective on your life, what brought you to where you are today, why do you think the way you do, and how can you use past experiences in future decision-making processes so that you can avoid making mistakes and saying stupid things and, things like that, right? You can use it to reflect after you tried something new to see how it made you feel and what you draw, there's lessons to draw from it, and so on and so forth. Then we can talk about developing extroverted thinking, right? You could say that, you develop this function by, for example, getting better at using tools, by learning to drive cars, by learning to, know how to use computers, by learning how to, for example, build and start a business, by learning how to better manage your finances. Extroverted thinking can be involved in all kinds of tool use. It's like learning how to use and navigate objects and to use processes and to use systems to your advantage, right? And this is something that's going to be so beneficial for you as an INFP too, because, if you learn to use different forms of pens, you can draw different things more accurately and so on and so forth, right? Or you can learn to use extroverted feeling. And in some ways, extroverted feeling is just introverted feeling, but faster and focused on other people, right? So in a sense, you can learn to understand your own emotions by communicating about your feelings with other people and by learning about how other people feel and relate to things. And by learning how they can feel about things, you can learn about who you are in that process, right? So this is a way of communicating and gaining introspective capacity through interpersonal skills, right? So by connecting with other people, by joining communities and groups, and by engaging with other world and people around you, all these things, they drive a higher sense of self and a stronger and a greater security and confidence in who you are. Or we can talk about developing introverted intuition. Through, for example, learning to reflect on philosophy, life, why we're here, what our purpose is, where we're going, what the future is going to look like, where we're all headed, and why we do that. It's that capacity to form a bird's eye view of the world, to formulate theories, to speculate on what could happen next and where we're all going, and to think about, your own future and your own life and all those things, right? And we can constantly see introverted intuition will be constantly intimately connected to introverted feeling because it's going to help you understand more things about yourself. Or you can develop extroverted sensing by spending time in nature, by engaging with your environment, by going to new places, by going on adventures, by being able to experience the world, to be embodied in your own body, to feel how it feels to have a hand or hands or legs, and to push your physical limits to learn to get to know yourself and how you work and how your body works and how you experience life, right? And of course, that's going to give you existential ideas in the future, and it's going to help you understand more about other people and why you feel the way you do, and so on and so forth. And lastly, you can identify or develop introverted thinking by learning to logically reflect on and explain why you feel the way you do and what cause and effect looks like, how that works. You can also use it to identify pros and cons, to make pro and con lists of, this is better for that reason, that's better for this reason, and so on. Or by just learning mathematics or learning to use logic or argumentation or things like that to your advantage. And so you can learn to use any cognitive function, none is limited to you. You shouldn't avoid the 4 shadow functions. You should learn to form a positive and healthy individualized relationship to each and every one of them in a way that works for you in your private life, in a way that feels good for you. Best of luck, and let me know how that goes in the comments down below.